This is the Beyond Reason podcast.
Yes, welcome to another edition of the Beyond Reason podcast. I am your host, Michael Yaffee, of course, voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. Make sure to follow me on Twitter or on Facebook if you'd like. Just recording a quick podcast today because there is really a lot to get to on the show today, a lot of different things, and frankly, I just want to get right to it. Of course, the biggest news of the week is the fact that Trump picked someone for the Supreme Court, someone to be the next justice of the Supreme Court. Yes, he has picked Brett Kavanaugh, which was kind of a surprise to me. I actually thought he was going to pick Amy Barrett. I really thought that was going to be the pick. I would have liked a Mike Lee or something. Now, anyone on this list would have been okay. It's a list put out by the Federalist Society. They obviously know what they're doing. They obviously are looking for those who will interpret the Constitution as originally intended. But I just thought it was interesting that this is the person he actually picked. Now, one of the things I really want to get into in today's show is the fact that I find this whole Supreme Court debate on the left and the right fascinating for so many reasons. Because really what the debate is about isn't even about who's qualified to be on the court. It really isn't even about the Constitution. Well, it is for those on the right. It was funny seeing leftist protesters outside the Supreme Court saying we need to reclaim our Constitution. Since when has the left been on fire about the Constitution? It's hard for me to buy this argument now that the left, that the liberals, that the progressives are really the ones fighting for the true Constitution. If that's going to be their argument, I think that's going to be hard for a lot of people to swallow. But what has the debate really been about when it comes to the Supreme Court? Well, the core of it, from everything I've seen, has been about abortion. That now we are going to have a court that's going to overturn Roe v. Wade. Now, I've talked about on the show before that I think that's very unlikely because, frankly, I don't think John Roberts is going to be one to overturn it. I think John Roberts appreciates precedent. He doesn't want the court to be responsible for overturning such a major decision. And this new guy, Kavanaugh, apparently likes precedent as well. It's going to be hard for me to believe that he is going to want to overturn Roe v. Wade. But I want to get deeper into the subject because I kept thinking about it this week. And I kept asking myself, why is this such a big deal for the left? Why is abortion such a seminal topic, a core issue for those on the left? Why is it so important to them that abortion be legal across this country? Why? I want you to think about that for a second. I guess you could say the same about the right. Why is it so important for people on the right to get rid of abortion? Think about that in your minds because I want to get to that. And because it was something I was really thinking about, because you look at how the left has been reacting to this pick for Supreme Court, and it could have been anyone. Anyone on that list in the left would have reacted the same way. It's not because it's Kavanaugh. It doesn't matter. It's because it's a Republican putting in a constitutionalist president, or a Republican putting in a constitutionalist justice. And it doesn't really matter who he's picked. They just think that the goal is to overturn Roe v. Wade. And there might be some reason for that, but I want to get to that in a sec. Just keep that in your mind. I just wanted to go over really quick one of the reasons why, if I were president, which is a very scary thought, but if I were president, why I would not have picked Kavanaugh. And Reason.com actually had a couple of great pieces outlining the different opinions of the Supreme Court justices, and they talked about Kavanaugh. Now, Kavanaugh, most of what he has done has been good. He dissented against net neutrality, which I'm all for. He's been really against a lot of these government agencies intervening intervening into the marketplace when they really don't have the power to do it. There's a lot we could get to in that. That's good. He's been good on gun rights in the past. But there was one thing that came out of this whole debate, a decision that he made that was really why I would not have picked him. Although he's going to be, anyone on that list is going to be good. So I think they should confirm him. But it has to do with a decision over Obamacare. Eventually that went to the Supreme Court, and Justice Roberts, dealing with the individual mandate, Justice Roberts said this is a tax. That's why the individual mandate gets to stay, because it's the IRS that is policing the individual mandate. So since the IRS is the enforcement agency, that means it's a tax. That means it gets to stay. Well, where did Justice Roberts get that idea to call it a tax? Well, there's a good possibility that he got it from Brett Kavanaugh, because Brett Kavanaugh was on the D.C. Circuit, and he dissented against saying the individual mandate was constitutional, but he did it for a weird reason. And this is what he said. He says that the D.C. District Court, the D.C. Circuit Court, should have been guided by the Anti-Injunction Act, an 1867 law that says no suit for the purpose of restraining the assessment or collection of any tax shall be maintained in any court. In other words, a tax cannot be challenged until it has been assessed and paid. That means, in Kavanaugh's view, Obamacare's individual mandate deserved to be counted as a tax, even though the law's authors called it a penalty. And the law's authors actually fought against calling it a tax. They kept saying over and over, it's not a tax. They didn't want the American people to think that it was a tax. And yet you have Kavanaugh saying we shouldn't even be looking at this case because it's a tax. So even though he dissented in that opinion, he basically put forward the idea that Obamacare, that individual mandate, is a tax. Once you put forward that idea, which John Roberts picked up on later, you're basically saying, well, if it's a tax, then the federal government has the authority to do it. Now, I believe that the federal government doesn't have the authority to do it because it's not a tax. You can't force someone to buy something, a product, a service. It's unconstitutional. I believe it's unconstitutional. I believe the founders would have totally understood that it's unconstitutional. But they stretched around, they found a way, and they said, well, it's not really a penalty. It's not really a mandate. It's a tax, and taxes are constitutional. So the fact that Kavanaugh said that in his dissenting opinion, and then Roberts basically used that argument later to cement it as constitutional, is a problem for me. So that's why I would not have picked him. There's a couple other decisions that were a little wary that he's done, but for the most part, he's going to be a good justice. But, you know, the left being against Kavanaugh has nothing to do with that. You know, I was against the pick because of that reason. The left could care less about that reason. They probably like him for that reason. Who knows? But they are focused on one thing, and that is the abortion issue. That has been the focus since the beginning. And they'll say other things too, LGBTQ rights and all this other stuff, extreme right-wing wingers on the court now. Bernie Sanders made a reference to that he is just going to be in the pocket of billionaires or all that stuff, or just going to support billionaires and corporations against the American people and all that stuff. And I really don't. I think that's going too far. I don't think that's what's going to energize the base. What they're trying to do is go after the abortion issue to energize the base. Now, Mike Pence was on CNN with Dana Bash earlier this week talking about this and gave his opinion on whether he would want to see Roe v. Wade overturned. Now, his answer here is fantastic. I love it. I love his honesty, but it's also going to be another thing that the left isn't going to like too much. Here's what he said.
Are you worried that he's not going to follow what you want to do?
Well, Dana, as you know, I'm pro-life. I don't apologize for it. And I'm proud to be part of a pro-life administration that's advanced pro-life policies. But what I can assure you is that what the president was looking for here was a nominee who will respect the Constitution as written, who will faithfully uphold the Constitution in all of his interpretations of the law.
Do you still want Roe
that
versus
was
Wade
the
to be
focus
overturned?
here. Well, I do, but I haven't been nominated to the Supreme Court.
Right, but you're
Judge
part of the
Kavanaugh
administration
has.
that campaigned, you and the president
That's
campaigned,
right.
saying
That's right.
you will find nominees to overturn Roe versus Wade. Will you be disappointed if he is given that opportunity and he doesn't? Will you be disappointed?
Well, let me say, as I said, I stand for the sanctity of life. This administration, this president are pro-life. But, what the American people ought to know is that, as the president said today, this is not an issue that he discussed with Judge Kavanaugh. I didn't discuss it with him either.
So there's Mike Pence's take. That's just great. I just wish more people on the right would just say that. It would probably get more people out to vote for him. But he says, yes, I want it to be overturned. But why is the left so against that decision being overturned? Why is it so important for them to be able to abort their baby? Because it's something, frankly, I don't get. I mean, even if Roe v. Wade is overturned, okay, it will go back to the states. The states can vote on it. Now, the polls do show that the majority of the American people do not want Roe v. Wade overturned, but most Americans do want some kinds of limitations on abortion. They don't think you should do it after so many weeks, for instance. And most people think you should be able to abort if it, threatens the life of the mother, for instance. So there's some gray areas here, but for the most part, most abortions are done not because of rape or incest or because the life of the mother is threatened. Most abortions are done because the girl had sex, got pregnant when she didn't want to, and wants to get rid of the baby because she doesn't want to have the baby. That's the vast majority of abortions are done for that reason. Why is it so important for the left, for women on the left, men on the left, to keep that going? We look at the scientific evidence, and there is so much evidence that very early on in the development of a baby in the womb, it's alive. Very early on, it has a heartbeat. Very early on, it has nerve endings. Very early on, it has body parts. It's alive. And so the people on the right, they're really fighting for this because they're trying to fight for life. They think it's important for our country, think it's important for our morality to uphold the value of life. That's why the right constantly fights for this. And of course, for religious reasons as well, because they think it's an affront to God to terminate a pregnancy, which I agree with them. But why does the left so want to cement this? Why is it so important for them to keep this? I think, honestly, part of it is because, one, they don't want to admit that a policy they support is responsible for the murder of millions of babies. That would be tough to admit. Admit the fact that something you support is actually evil and is actually murder. For them to admit that, I mean, who would want to admit that? They don't want to admit that. But I think really the core issue is this goes back to the sexual revolution, really, is what I think it is. I don't think they want to... It's kind of hard to say, but it's almost the same reason that we don't want to teach abstinence to kids. Or that we don't want to teach society in general that it's good to wait until marriage. They don't want to admit that maybe it's a good thing. Maybe the Bible was right. Maybe Christians were right. And maybe it's a good thing to not have sex with multiple partners, to not have sex before marriage. They don't want to make the sacrifice, which is to wait maybe until marriage or to wait until you are ready to have a child. I think that's really the core of this, because all of a sudden you take away abortion and then you add another layer of personal responsibility to sex. And we just can't have that in our society today. No, I should be able to have sex with who I want, when I want, for whatever reason I want. I know we kind of make some overtures to, oh, well, we have to wait until the third date or something, or we have to wait until I really know the guy or really like the guy. And Christians have been saying, no, you should wait till marriage. You should wait until really you're prepared to have a child. That idea is revolutionary in today. It didn't used to be, but it's revolutionary in today's society. The idea that, wait a minute, having sex could get me pregnant, and having sex now has this extra layer of personal responsibility, and maybe this whole free willy sexual revolution that's come along is not the greatest thing. I don't think they can admit that to themselves. And I think that's the core of this. Really, I don't think it's a rights issue. Unless you think of it, I want the right to have sex without responsibility. Is that what they want? The right to have sex without responsibility? They say it's, oh, well, stay away from my body. It's my body, my decision. You know, libertarians make a decent argument that this isn't the role of government. Okay, that's a totally different argument, the role of government, but that's not what I'm hearing here. That's not the core issue here. The core issue is they don't want to have personal responsibility for sex. They don't want to admit that maybe Christians were right, that you should wait till marriage. They don't want to admit that maybe aborting and having abortion all these years has actually been murder. That's what I think it is. That's what I was thinking about this week. Because I'm like, why is this so important for you? Why is this so important that you can abort your baby? And it's just, well, what leads to the baby? Sex. It's not the abortion that's important to them. It's what leads to the abortion, which is sex. They want to be able to have this sex. They think it's a form of freedom. They see freedom as being able to have sex without the responsibility of maybe getting pregnant. And now we have other ways. We have birth control and condoms and stuff, but that's never good enough. There could still be a possibility. So they want total freedom to be able to have sex without the personal responsibility act. And that's wrong. But they will not give that up. Ben Shapiro, he wrote in Town Hall in his column, and I thought he had an interesting take on this, a little bit different than what I thought. But he says abortion has become the left's sacrament. It's become a sacrament to them. It's become bigger than just a rights issue. It's a sacrament. It's good now to have an abortion. Abortions are a good thing. It used to be, yes, you have a right to have an abortion, but it really should be your last resort. People shouldn't want to have an abortion. That's totally changed now. The left thinks it's good. If you want to have an abortion, great, have abortions. And he says it's become a sacrament. And this is what he said about it. He said, yes, abortion is now a signifier that you refuse to be ruled by the patriarchy. Avoidance of pregnancy may be a wise life choice, according to third-wave feminists, preventing women from being sucked into the grinding maw of maternal life. But abortion is something even better, a signal that you just don't care about the system. Is he right about that? I mean, to them, and that goes back to the idea that they believe that being able to have sex without the consequences is a type of freedom. Freedom from the patriarchy. It's not freedom from the patriarchy, whatever that means. It's freedom from responsibility, if anything. But you are responsible. You are responsible for the life that is growing inside of you. And by having an abortion, you're killing that life that is growing inside of you. And you have to take responsibility for that. So if Roe v. Wade's overturned and a society has to admit that maybe this has not been good, maybe that's a life in there, maybe it's murder, then all those people that have had abortions have to take responsibility for the fact that they maybe killed a life that was growing inside of them. And I don't think they can live with that responsibility. So maybe you agree or disagree with me on that. Another thing that I wanted to get to today was something that's been a theme on this show for a while. And that's this harassment of Trump staffers, Trump administration officials, supporters of Trump. We've seen that as well, being harassed. I talked about that before. You had the guy who stole the kids' Make America Great Again hat and then poured a drink on him. You had another guy in Florida who had a Trump sign, or it was a Trump flag, and he was beat up for it. You had what happened to the Homeland Security Secretary in a restaurant. And now it seems that Kellyanne Conway has come out, and she talked about it in the Washington Post, and she says she's been harassed, like in places like the supermarket, for being against Trump. Of course, her response is actually kind of funny. Somebody came up to her in the supermarket and said, "You have to be ashamed of yourself. Go look in the mirror." And then she said, "Mirrors in aisle 9. I'll go get one right now." So she just kind of goes with it and fights back, which is very interesting. But Ivanka Trump has also been harassed. You've had Stephen Miller was harassed on the street because he was buying sushi and then he was taking it home and he was harassed on the street or whatever. And it was interesting. I was reading from the Washington Post here, and it said, for as long as the White House has existed, its star occupants have inspired a voluble mix of demonstrations, insults, and satire. On occasion, protesters have besieged the homes of presidential underlings, such as Karl Rove, who once looked out his living room to find several hundred protesters on his lawn. Yet what distinguishes the Trump era's turbulence is the sheer number of his deputies, many of them largely anonymous before his inauguration, who have become the focus of planned and sometimes spontaneous public fury. And he talks about Stephen Miller being harassed and others being harassed. And this is being a big topic for me because ever since Trump was inaugurated, ever since Trump was elected, I kept telling the left, you're overreacting. Nothing has happened yet that is so bad that is worth this kind of rage. You're overreacting and you're really just hurting yourself in the long run. And I still believe that. I believe they are hurting themselves in the long run. But right now I believe they're hurting the civil society, because what's going to happen is the Trump supporters are going to fight back. And then things get really ugly. But I started thinking about this, and I was thinking, why is the left? Because I just talked about why. I asked the question, why is the left so upset over maybe the possibility of overturning Roe v. Wade, of getting rid of abortion? Why is it so important to them to have abortion that they have just gone nuts with these wild protests and other things to keep abortion? And then it's the same thing where it's, why is the left so outraged at everything Trump does? What is it? Ever since he was inaugurated. And, I started thinking about it, and I don't think it really has to do with Trump. Maybe a little bit of it has to do with Trump, but I honestly believe that if Ted Cruz or a Mike Pence or, even maybe a Ben Carson were president, that they would be just as outraged. That there would be this level of outrage. Because they're not upset at Trump the person. They're upset at the fact that they cannot be proud of the country unless their leftist policies are put into place, like I said before. This is what it's come to. It used to be before that you could still be proud of your country and maybe want some changes and try to organize politically to get those things done. It's not that way anymore. It's, I'm ashamed of my country because we don't have universal health care. I'm ashamed of my country because we don't have paid family leave. I'm ashamed of my country because a baker can refuse to bake a wedding cake for a gay wedding. I'm ashamed of my country because we don't have net neutrality anymore. It's gone to this extreme. But I got to tell you, when I bring up to people that the left has just gone too far with this rage, that, for the most part, we still have it pretty good in this country, that nothing has happened that is really worth the level of outrage that we've seen by the left. Most of what I've seen is, well, Trump does it too. Trump has been outraged too. Trump has bullied too. Trump has said some nasty things too. And I have to admit, they have a point. I have to admit it. This was one of the things I worried about when Trump was campaigning and if Trump was elected. Now, I actually was more worried that he was not going to govern conservatively. I thought he was going to moderate and maybe go more to the left and maybe even moderate his tone, but he was going to be more of a leftist president. It's actually been the opposite. He has not moderated his tone, but he has governed more conservatively. I think part of that is because of the left, from the moment he was elected, was just overly outraged at everything he did. Trump's just like, well, screw you. I'm just going to do exactly the opposite of what you want. So that's what's happening. But I have to admit they have a point, because I think that, if Ted Cruz or Mike Pence were president today, I think the outrage would be pretty close to the same. I really do. Maybe not as frequent, just because Trump seems to do things so much. He's something new every day. But I think the outrage would be the same. But the problem with Trump, this is what I was worried about, is it's hard for us to keep the moral high ground in these arguments, because they can immediately say, well, the Trump administration has been vicious and bullying and said some nasty things too. Mostly just Trump himself, not really his administration, but Trump himself has said these nasty things too. And honestly, I can't argue with that, because he has. This is the one problem, because we keep hearing, well, fight fire with fire. He's a fighter. This is great. We're winning because he's a fighter. And I keep telling people the one problem with this is we've lost the moral high ground. We no longer have the argument that we can tell them to stop their outrage because it's not good, because they will immediately say, well, you're doing the same thing. So by losing the moral high ground, we can no longer, the argument to stop the outrage is going to go away. So instead of saying you need to stop the outrage, you need to calm down, it's your outrage is wrong. It's not that outrage itself is bad. It's that what the outrage is directed to is bad. And that's a problem, because I think the outrage in general is too high. I don't think it's necessary for what's going on in this country. I think we still have it pretty good. So in general, this high level of outrage, some of it on both sides, is too much, and it's not good for our society. But what's going to happen now, because both sides are doing it, is not that outrage is bad, it's that whose outrage is bad. It's the whataboutism, it's the teams. And that's really going to be a problem for the future of this country. I really believe that. I try to be a voice of reason and say, fire, we're just creating more fire, we need to have a moral high ground, we can't be like them. But it's falling on deaf ears, it really is. Because what's happening now is the right is also upping their level of outrage. So you have the right upping their level, then the left ups their level more, and then the right ups their level more, and the level of outrage just goes up and up and up, and it's a problem. It really is going to be a problem. I hope you all realize this. And that maybe we should take a step back. And yes, there are things that both sides want changed. There are things that both sides are upset about. But if you take a step back and you look at the country and you look at the way things are, we still have it pretty good. So maybe we should stop with some of this outrage, but I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think we've lost the moral high ground. That's the one problem with Trump. I know a lot of people like Trump. They like that he's a fighter. He has done a lot of great things. He has the guts to do things that other presidents have not had the guts to do, and I have praised him for that. But I'm just telling you, one of the problems is going to be that we no longer have the moral high ground. A lot of people are going to tell me, who cares? Who cares about the moral high ground? We're winning. All right. We'll see what the long-term effects of all this is. Another thing I wanted to mention today is it's actually another criticism of Trump. I know a lot of you are going to get upset at me for that. But it comes from this headline here from NPR. I found it. It's been on several different outlets, but it says Pfizer, the drug company, agrees to postpone drug price hikes after Trump tweet. So the company Pfizer put out a list, and they actually hiked some of their drugs. Now, it was just some of them. It wasn't all of them. There was actually some on the list that they lowered. But Trump focused on the hike hikes, and this is what he said. So he tweeted out, and he said, Pfizer and others should be ashamed that they have raised drug prices for no reason. They are merely taking advantage of the poor and others unable to defend themselves, while at the same time giving bargain basement prices to other countries in Europe and elsewhere. We will respond. So the CEO of Pfizer actually called Trump, or it was actually the Pfizer chairman and chief executive officer, CEO Ayn Reed, talked to the Health and Human Service Secretary Alex Azar and try to work something out, because Trump actually put out a plan earlier this year, a plan that would hopefully lower drug prices in the long run. And I actually liked a lot of that plan. I think adding more competition to the drug market is a good thing. There was a lot of stuff in that plan that was really good. I liked it. But Trump tweeting this out, and then he basically tweets out to intimidate the company. The company does get intimidated because their stock fell after Trump put that tweet out. They call the Trump administration. They try to work something out, and they said, we're not going to hike those prices. And then President Trump tweeted this out. He said, just talked with Pfizer CEO and Secretary Azar on our drug pricing blueprint. Pfizer is rolling back price hikes so American patients don't pay more. We applaud Pfizer for this decision and hope other companies do the same. Great news for the American people. Now, most people, especially the Trump supporters, they're going to say this. They're going to say, this is great. See, Trump is fighting for the American people. This is why we love Trump. He's sticking it to them for us. And I have to go back to this because there's a part of me that's like, oh, wow, it actually worked. Maybe Trump did something good. But then I had to take a step back and think about this for a sec. What is the role of the president? As a conservative, if we believe in small government and we believe the president has too much power, how can we be happy if the president is tweeting out something against a private company and bullying them to do what the president wants? As a conservative, should we really believe that this is the role of the president? And Trump's done stuff like this in the past, where even if that company does something we don't like, should the president come out and basically trash that company in the public sphere and tell them, you need to do this? Is that really the role of the president in a free economy? Could you imagine if Obama did this for some company that conservatives support, whoever it is? We would have been outraged because it's not the president's business. This is not the president's business to decide what drug companies charge. And people will say, well, they get subsidies and they get government deals and all that stuff. And that's a problem as well. All of that's a problem. And this is why I say the president needs to have less power. The federal government needs to have less power. But I get uncomfortable when the president starts tweeting out demands to private companies. And we say, well, it's a good thing because he's fighting for the American people. Is it the role of the president to do this? Some of you will say it is. I'm not so sure. I get very uncomfortable with this. I think we are allowing the presidency to have too much power in the free economy. And it might be good now. You think, oh, we like these results, but you have to look at the big picture. And in the big picture, I'm not sure this is a good thing. Just wanted to throw that out there. All right. I appreciate you listening to the show. If you want to catch any other shows on the Beyond Reason Network, just go to the Beyond Reason Network on iTunes or anywhere podcasts are available. I appreciate you listening to the show. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee, and I'll catch you guys next time.